Yeah. Okay. You'll send it to Shmaya after? Okay. Okay, I think we spoke last about Kavod HaTorah, and we spoke about the fact that the Torah warns us not to learn Torah unless we have clean hands, and we spoke about what that means about the schus of learning Torah. But now comes the part of Kavod HaTorah that's perhaps is most chaviv to us as people who have learned Torah from Rabbeim and feel the gratitude and the respect for the generation before us that has taught us Torah. So certainly the concept of kavod for Laimdei Torah, that's something that's very near and dear to us. But the truth is it goes much deeper than that, and that is that we are Laimdei Torah. So when the Ramchal talks about having kavod for people that learn Torah, he's talking about having kavod for ourselves. It's first of all about having kavod for Laimdei Torah, meaning to see in each other someone who learns Torah, and we should see that in each other, and have a value for each other because we see that shared goal and that shared challenge that we have taken on together to learn Torah together. And second of all, of course, if we're the ones that are zeicha to be in the Beis Medrash, right now we're sitting and learning in a Beis Medrash, we certainly should have not just a certain hakaras hatoiv to Hashem that we have the schus to do that, but we also should have tremendous kavod for ourselves. And a person having kavod for himself is not at all the same thing as being a Baal Gaiva. A Baal Gaiva is someone who takes the credit for the milas that he has. And of course we know that we don't deserve the credit. The credit goes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But someone who respects themselves is someone who values his tafkid and respects that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very important thing, that a person should carry himself with a certain dignity. In fact, the Gemara says, I don't think the Mesilas Yesharim brings it here, but the Gemara says in Megillah that they asked Rav Preda what he did to be Zaycha to live so long. Many Gemaras there in Megillah, B'maha harachta yamim. And Rav Preda said a bunch of things, and one of the things he said is that he never made a bracha before a kayin. It's a machlekes v'shayim if it's talking about Kriyas HaTorah or Berachas HaMazon, but he never made a bracha before a kayin. So the Gemara said, what? He never made a bracha before a kayin? That can't be right. Because the halacha is that if a Talmud Chacham would take a bracha after a kayin ha'ma'aretz, Oisei Talmud Chacham is chayiv misa. I was always told to spell that it's Oisei Talmud Chacham. We don't blame the kayin ha'ma'aretz, he's doing his thing. But the Talmud Chacham should recognize that he has to carry himself a certain way. And he doesn't belong after a kayin ha'ma'aretz. And that type of pride and dignity of ourselves would be such an unbelievable thing to work on. Because it's empowering, but at the same time it gives us a certain sense of achrayus. What could help us to polish our actions more than self-respect? How often is the way that we act that we're not proud of a result of a lack of respect for ourselves? So that's a very, very powerful thing. And in terms of the fact that we're Laimdei Torah, so we have the best job in the world, we have the most enviable job in the world, to have a respect for that. That's a very chashuv thing. So let's see first about the kavod of Talmidei Chachamim. Ube'inyan Laimdei Torah hinei mikra kasav. It's a beferish pasuk, last week's parsha. Mipnei seva takum vehodarta pnei zakein. Right, stand up for an elderly person and show honor for a zakein. The Gemara says in Kedushin that a zakein stands for zeh shekana. Zakein, zeh shekana chachma. So a zakein is not necessarily an old man, but he's a wise man. The reason why we associate the word zikna with old age is because usually the amount of time it takes to amass a tremendous amount of Torah to be kaina chachma, a person is a zakein. But really, zakein is the point is that it represents a certain wisdom, and we honor the person that has amassed that wisdom. I should point out that we're not honoring him because his head is a computer. I don't walk into my office and stand up for my computer. Someone whose head has a lot of Torah in it, that's not necessarily something to be. And in fact, Chazal have a very derogatory term for someone who doesn't carry himself like a Talmud Chacham, but just has a lot of information in his head. Chazal call him a chamor noisei svarim, a donkey carrying books. Like you put a lot of Gemaras on top of a donkey, it doesn't become a Talmud Chacham. And that's, you have to be careful. Our guf is also part of the process, and it's supposed to be transformative and affect us and be meaningful to us, and we open ourselves up to receive the wisdom of the Torah, and we try to make ourselves open to the fact that the Torah should be able to transform us. If it doesn't, these things don't apply. We're talking about people that the Torah has transformed them. From this we learn to any type of kavod it's possible to do to them. A chassid avada is mechabe tamidei chachamim. Why? Because we know that the point of a chassid is that he wants to go the extra mile to give nachas to Hashem. He's so in love with Hashem that he wants to go the extra mile just to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu how much he loves him. And he knows how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves his Laimdei Torah, and he knows how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah are one. And by him showing kavod for someone who learns Torah, he's showing HaKadosh Baruch Hu how much he loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says the Torah describes someone who's mechabed Yirei Hashem. So Chazal tell us, Zeh Yehoshaphat Melech Yehuda. This is Yehoshaphat, who was the king of Yehuda. Shekivan Shehaya Roya Talmud Chacham. Whenever he saw a Talmud Chacham, Haya Oymeid is the king. He didn't have to get up for anyone. But Haya Oymeid Mikisai, he would get up from his throne. It's very symbolic when a king gets up from his throne, because it shows a certain subservience, that with all of my power, I recognize that I'm subservient to you. So and he would hug him, and he would kiss him, and he would say to him, Rebbe, Rebbe, Moiri, Moiri. Literally, by the way, I want to translate. We're using the terms Rebbe and Moiri. Rebbe, Rebbe, my teacher, my teacher, my master, my master. Rab Zera, Kishahaya Chalosh Me Limudei. Now, Rab Zera, I just want to tell you, when you learn a lot of Gemara, you start to learn a little bit, if you could say this, the personalities of the Amoraim. You start to learn them a little bit. Like anyone who's learned a few Masechtas knows that Rabbi Yirmiyah was a jokester. And Rabbi Yirmiyah was the one that asked those questions that were like just the kind of question that there's even one Gemara that says that after Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question, Apkuhu mi bei midrasha, they threw him out of the Beis Medrash. He was a troublemaker. There are certain Amoraim that you could see certain personality traits in them. Rav Nachman was a very powerful Amora, and he carried tremendous political clout. There's certain things that you see, you learn about them, you get to know them. Reb Zera was a very fierce Amora, very serious. Okay, he took himself very, very seriously. Okay, and Reb Zera, when he was weak and he couldn't learn, he wanted to still be connected to Torah, but he didn't have koyach to learn. So what's he going to do? So the Gemara says, Reb Zera kishahaya chalosh me limudai, when Reb Zera was weak from learning, haya meisim atzmai al pesach beis hamedrash, he would place himself by the opening of the Beis HaMedrash, la'asois mitzvah, kishayakum milifnei Talmidei Chachamim, so that he can do the mitzvah, that he'll stand up from Talmidei Chachamim. The great Reb Zera put himself at the door of the Beis HaKnesset so he could keep getting up as the Talmidei Chachamim walked in. Kol eile dvarim shekvar royim anachnu. These are things that we see. We know that these are things Hashem wants, V'gila daitay ha'elyon b'zeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu already, it was megala his das about this. V'kivan shekein, and if that's the case, mi ha'ish ha'chafetz la'asais nachas ruach li'yotzroi. Someone that wants to give Hashem nachas, hinei b'derech zeh yelech, go in this path, do this. V'yosef lekach, and come up with tricks. Think of your own things. I love that the Mesilas Yesharim says this. We're not drones over here. The Mesilas Yesharim gives us orders. So now, tomorrow, we'll find all of us will have cheers by the opening of the Beis HaMedrash because we're imitating Reb Zera. Chas v'shalom. Reb Zera was Reb Zera. He figured out his way of being Mechabed Talmidei Chachamim. And we will figure out our way of showing HaKadosh Baruch Hu our ha'aracha, our value for those who learn His Torah. Yosef Lega b'tachbulais, of your own tricks. To do what Hashem wants. Think of your own things. Think of the way that you relate to Talmidei Chachamim, and maybe there are things that you can do to be able to enhance your relationship with Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, Mishael, for example, his way of getting close to Talmidei Chachamim is that he starts up with them. He makes trouble. He's like a little Rabbi Yirmiyah. He goes over. But L'maisa, I happen to know that Rav Sachs absolutely loves him, even though he makes trouble. You know what I'm talking about. He makes trouble. But L'maisa, he forged bonds with Talmidei Chachamim because he brought his feisty personality to the table. And each of us can find our way, our connection, our glue, our way of creating. Some of us it's more emotional, some of us it's with a sense of humor, some of us it's with a trick. You know, I realize as a Talmid Chacham that walks near my house every Shabbos, maybe one of you has this, that your Rav walks to shul nearby you, and he walks to shul. I don't know if you have such a thing, but my father once figured out, back in the day, that Rav Aaron Schechter, many Shabbosim, has a certain route that he walks to Chaim Berlin. So my father, why should he stop making appointments with Rav Aaron Schechter? My father was just mechavein. I always wonder if Rav Aaron in the back of his mind was not like, oh no, here comes Sonnenschein again. You know, I always wonder about that. But he was mechavein to be malave, the Talmid Chacham, to the yeshiva. And I'm not so different than my father. With my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yadis David, I used to live in his building. So when I moved in, I made a decision to myself. I'm staying by davening every single tefillah. My wife was maskim. I'm walking home to Rosh Yeshiva. And that meant that I was leaving last. But I would sit down and learn while the Rosh Yeshiva did whatever he did, send good Shabbos to everyone, whatever he did. And then when the Rosh Yeshiva left, I walked with him. We never discussed it. It was just what I did. But I did it every Shabbos, every tefillah. Okay, sometimes the Rosh Yeshiva didn't come to yeshiva on Friday nights. You know, Shabbos Mincha was in his house. So either way, I davened with him in his house because he would do Shal Shuddis after. So the Shabbos morning was all the time, and Friday nights was a lot of the time. And we used to ask him questions and shmooze. And I have notes in my notebook, B'derech Hazara El Abayis, of things that he taught me. Isn't that amazing? I have these fascinating conversations. When we came to America, what happened was, Bein Hazmanim, I would go to my parents and in-laws, and the Rosh Yeshiva, he's a Rosh Yeshiva in Chaim Berlin also, so Bein Hazmanim, he would come to America. But in America, I wasn't in his building. In fact, there were times that I was a mile in the opposite direction. So he would be walking from Chaim Berlin here, and I would be eating my Suda here. But I told myself, if you want schar for walking the Rosh Yeshiva for a year in Eretz Yisrael, don't stop doing it when it's inconvenient. So I would walk him home and then walk the mile and a half to my Suda. I don't regret it. I remember one walk that he explained to us his shitas about if the Golem of Prague ever existed, about certain forgeries and Kisvei Kodesh, things that I've said over, fascinating things I've said over in Shir, that you don't get them from Seder, you know, you get them from that walk. But that was Mishael has his way, that was my way, that was my tachbula, that I got, that was my shtella. I walk home to Rosh Yeshiva. There were other people there also a lot of times. So I have funny stories with him. I remember people driving him crazy. I remember one time I said something chutzpahdik to him. My heart races when I think about it. You know, until it came out of my mouth, I didn't realize how absolutely, it was a little bit, you know, a little Rabbi Yirmiyah-like, you know, how absolutely chutzpahdik it was. But it's such a cherished memory to me. I would walk up, he was on the 4th floor, I was on the 2nd floor. So we would walk into the building, he would say good Shabbos to everyone else that was walking him, and then it was just me and him. We would walk in together on Shabbos. We would walk up the 2 flights. And when it came up to my apartment, he would say to me, Good Shabbos, and I would always try to walk him the rest of the way up. And we would always, every week, we had this little fight by the door. And I would just make believe that I forgot every week and just keep walking up with him. And at some point, halfway up the flight, he would turn to me and say, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. Maybe he was thinking, can I have 1 minute to myself? Maybe. But that was my way of being mechaber a Talmid Chacham. And it's kedai. Let's read one more sentence because that will lead us to the beginning of a whole new section of Chasidus that will start next time in Mirz Hashem. Ubechlal zeh kemoikein kibud beis hakneses ubeis hamedrash. Also included in this is honoring a shul and a beis medrash. She'ein dai shelo yinag behem kalus roish. It's not enough that we don't stand party in a beis hakneses or beis hamedrash. We're careful how we talk. We're careful how we act in a beis hakneses. We act in a respectful way. How will we dressed in a beis hakneses? Let's say you're in the dorm and you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I'm not telling you what you should or you shouldn't, but it could be like, I'll learn for 20 minutes. Okay, get dressed first. Or learn in your room. But are you honoring the room? I'm talking about Bein HaStarim. I'm not getting into yeshiva. I'm just talking about between you and God over here. I'm not, but have a sense of my relationship with Hashem. And this makom is the Beis Elokim. This is the place of Hashem. How do I act in this makom? It bothers me that people leave sometimes, they're like leftovers, Sometimes you sit down by a table, you see there are crumbs around or something. Like, don't clean up for me. Clean up because Ein Zeh Ela Beis Elokim. V'zeh Shar HaShamayim. Sheyinag behem kol minei kavod u'moira b'chol min hagav u'b'chol pe'uloisav in everything that you do. Anything you wouldn't do in the throne room of a great king, don't do in a Beis HaKnesses. Very, I would say also, like if you're reading a great book, and Shabbos afternoon, and the air conditioning of the Beis Medrash is great, I don't think the Beis Medrash is a place to read a book. I think a Beis HaMedrash is a place to be Isaac and Inyanim Ruchniim. And I think not being in the Beis Medrash then is honoring the Beis Medrash. Why are you in your room? I'm honoring the Beis Medrash. Don't try that when you miss Shir. Why weren't you here? I was honoring. Don't do that. Okay? But there's makom to have that sense on our own. You understand? He's not talking about what it says in Shulchan Aruch. He's talking about just your own sense. This is a shul. How am I acting here? Okay? And with this we finish the Yira part of the Chelkei HaChasidus. And Be'ezer Hashem next time we'll start to learn the Ava part. Until now we were talking about how to show respect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and now we're going to take it even a step further and try to engage in how to show love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Be'ezer Hashem, Yashikayach.